This is Big Tasty Sports.
Welcome back to the NFL Divisional Preview Series. We are moving on to the last division in the NFC. And I got I was going to say the three box, but I guess it's more of a triangle tonight. Got D back on the headset with the sweet NBA Jam shirt. What's up, man?
Yeah, I kind of look like a telemarketer right now.
Interestingly enough,
there's nothing wrong with being a telemarketer. Okay, there's nothing wrong with being a telemarketer at all. It's probably just
very true. True.
Just cut out what I said.
You have that sales pitch ready for the end of the video, right?
I hope.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Yes.
Great. And as always, Yanni joining with the sweet hat. How's it going tonight, Yanni?
It's going well. Good to be back with you guys. See, just in case JJ didn't make it here, I had to represent it here.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
Hopefully JJ makes it, but he's a little bit preoccupied right now.
JJ is a little preoccupied. We thought we might have the full quad box tonight, but who knows? We may still get it. So, hey, as we've been doing, we're going to go through these teams one at a time. We are going to talk generally about the teams, but especially the first half of the season in terms of schedule. Going to talk about what each of these teams needs to do to win the division, and then any player props or other bets that we think could be a good look. So we are going to start off with, in alphabetical order, nothing else, with the Dallas Cowboys. Over under set at 9.5, minus 150 to the under. So, or to the over, sorry. Be like, go bet that now.
If it's on the under, then I know what I'm betting right now.
Yeah, minus 150 to the over, plus 140 to the under. Division odds are plus 190. And here's the first half of their schedule. They're at the Giants to open things up, then the Jets, at Arizona, New England at home, at San Francisco, at the Chargers, so kind of a West Coast swing there, and then they get a bye. Then they have the Rams at home, and they finish at Philadelphia. So I'm going to kick this one off. This is a team that, going into the research, I have not thought very highly of, but there were a couple factors that I think I wasn't considering very clearly when I was looking at the Cowboys. One of those is Dak Prescott had a really rough season last year. And I'm not necessarily a huge Dak Prescott fan, but a big part of his issues were turnovers. And if you go back and look at his career, last year was a significant outlier. It was really bad, but none of his other seasons have been that bad. And I think a part of that was that the Cowboys ended up having injury issues on the offensive line. This is an offensive line that in the past was really dominant. And last year, especially because of injuries, had more struggles than they would have otherwise. This year, PFF has their offensive line ranked at number 6, which they have up 6 from number 12. I think the big question there is if Tyron Smith can stay healthy. But if he can, and if he can give Dak Prescott time, this is a team that has a good group of skill position players. Obviously, CeeDee Lamb, Gallup, and I think a big thing on Gallup, I've mentioned this before, but sometimes on the Bet the Board podcast, they bring a guy on who specializes in people coming back from injuries. And there is a lag there when people come back from an ACL to where they get back to full strength, even when they can start playing again. And this is Gallup's second season back now. So I think we could see him return more to form, basically. They picked up Brandon Cooks, who I'm not a huge fan of, but if he's your second or third receiver, I think that's pretty solid. And he definitely has that ability to stretch the field. And then Tony Pollard, who, if he can stay healthy and he can carry a full workload, is incredibly dynamic and would be an upgrade over working Ezekiel Elliott in, though I know they're not over bringing Elliott back on a reduced contract potentially yet. So this offense, I think, has a really high upside because that skill position group is good. And the offensive line, if they stay healthy, is one of the top in the league. I will say they lost Dalton Schultz, and I do think that's a negative because we'll see if they have a tight end who can step up and fill that role, and that is something that they'll be missing because Schultz was a great performer for them last year. Then you switch over to the defensive side, and man, I think this defense is awesome. The defensive line is incredible. Obviously, Micah Parsons, DeMarcus Lawrence, Trayvon Diggs at cornerback, and then they picked up Stephon Gilmore. I'm curious to see how good he'll be. But my thought is if Stephon Gilmore, who's formerly one of the best cornerbacks in the league, is capable of playing as a solid number 2 cornerback now, that significantly ups the upside of this defense. And so I think that was an important pickup for them. And then they added Maisie Smith in the middle at nose tackle to kind of take up some space there. So I think this is a defense that was really good last year, and I don't see any reason for them to take steps backward this year. On the offensive side, they are going from Kellen Moore to Brian Schottenheimer, and so there is a little bit of change on the offensive side, but not the defensive side with coaching. So I think when it comes to the Cowboys, I have to be honest that I don't like the Cowboys. It's almost like the Packers, where I have a little bit of a negative disposition when I think about them. But diving into this team, and part of what I did is Philly's the standard bearer in this division and in the NFC period, and matching them up unit for unit with Philadelphia. I'm not saying they're as good, but I don't think there's a wide gap between any of these units with Philadelphia. So I come away from that being a lot higher on the Cowboys. I actually think I didn't bet this yet. I don't love going to minus 150 on things, but I think over 9.5 is a pretty damn good bet. Because I think this team probably gets to 10, 11 wins and pushes the Eagles, at least in the East, to have to play well in order to get the division. D, what are your thoughts on the Cowboys?
I think I agree with everything that you just said in the past 8 minutes. No,
that was only 7 minutes and 14 seconds, dude.
No, that was a phenomenal, like, head to toe. I agree with what you're saying. Trying to think of anything else to add. I have them in the first 8 games. I have them as 5-3. I think that having Schottenheimer is going to be pretty interesting. He was the OC in Seattle in the Let Russ Cook days, right? They had all those points, everything like that. So I'm interested to see. He probably wants Dak to run the ball a little bit more, or like, if there's not a read there at first, like, just don't, throw a pick, because how many picks did Dak have last year? 15, 16?
Way too many.
It's not all his fault, right? So having the new offense in there will be pretty interesting. He's not calling plays though. I mean, that's pretty interesting. It's like, how long is McCarthy calling plays if they struggle out of the gate? You take a look at their schedule, though. I don't expect them to struggle out of the gate. They're at Giants, they're playing the Jets, at Cardinals, and the Pats. You can make a case for starting 4-0. It gets a little bit harder as you go down the list. Tony Pollard, I think, is a stud. I'm interested to see how he comes off. Was it a broken ankle that he had at the end of last season? I'm interested to see how he comes off of that. And I don't think he can be the only guy. So I do think he's a stud, but you need something else there. Does Zeke come back? I think that Zeke kind of holds him back. But if there's, cash to be had there on like a cheap deal, I guess you can plug him into kind of like the red zone offense and everything like that. So I think that, head to toe, the Cowboys have a top 5 roster. It's just about putting it all together. And we've seen that there's times in the past, like, 2020 to 22, there's points of the year where there's a ton of people who are like, hey, the Cowboys might have like the best team in the NFL. And then they hit this like stride, and it's kind of like a reverse stride. It's like all of a sudden, okay, this was a huge game, and they kind of let us down there. So it's a difficult team. You have all of the talent there. You have a pretty damn good offensive line. If I had to take an over, I'd take the over on the win total of 9.5. I'm not going to take them to win the NFC East. I think that the Eagles are the gold standard, but I do think that this team should be good for 10 to 11 games. And when they play the Eagles, it's never an easy time. I mean, so it's going to be interesting. I lean towards the over 9.5, and hopefully the Eagles can go 2-0 against them.
I just looked this up quick on the turnover thing before I throw it to Yanni too. One of the stats that I ran for the past 4 seasons was interceptions per pass. And last year Dak was at 0.038, which whatever. The point is that was more than double any of the other 3 seasons before that, because he had 15 picks in 12 games. So that's when I say that it was
for a bunch of games.
Yeah, that's when I say like it wasn't just an outlier; it was way out there. So, Yanni, what do you think about the Cowboys?
I don't have a whole lot to add from what you guys said. I think, again, I'm probably in agreement with you. You touched on a few things. I think offensive line is always going to be key with this team. And I do agree they have a pretty solid offensive line. I don't know if I would have it rated as quite as highly. I'm actually doing some offensive line rankings as we speak. But, I think the Cooks acquisition to me is big because I kind of am a Cooks guy in the sense of what you said. If he's not your primary guy, he's the type of guy that if he has single coverage or he can get over the top, I think he probably still has a little bit left in the tank that can make that happen. You also pointed out Dalton Schultz. I think that's a big negative for this offense. But really the thing that's interesting to me about Dallas is when I thought of this team, and when you think back on the previous season, I was like, okay, offense was pretty explosive. You had the Dak turnovers. Defense was, pretty good. And you start diving in and you're like, man, that defense wasn't pretty good. They were really, really, really good. They were, I think when I saw they were second in defensive EPA, if you look at DVOA metrics, all the different things you look at, they were right up there. And you mentioned some of those guys they brought in. I think if Gilmore can give them anything, this defense becomes even stronger. So I agree with you guys. I think this team does win double-digit games. And I do think that they push the Eagles. I still think the Eagles win this division. We'll get to them, obviously. But I think Dallas is right there. And I don't want to go too off script here, but I when we started with our last breakdown, I said this is a really competitive division when we did the NFC North. I actually think this NFC East is going to be more competitive than people may think. It was kind of like Philly and Dallas, and then you had New York and Washington kind of a tick below them. And it still probably is that, but I think that gap is narrowed quite a bit. So I think this is going to be a fun division. Just to wrap up, I have Dallas 5-3 as well in those first 8. I mean, I think there are obviously 3 tough road games that they have there, but I also am not going to give a layup to a home game against a team like the Jets. That's not a gimme game. So anyways, but I think they'll come out of that around 5-3. And I think that, just like you guys said, they probably get to 10-7, maybe even 11-6.
Yeah, I didn't say mine. I actually have them at 6-2, but I definitely can see 5-3. I mean, they have some tough games in there. To your point, some of those on the road too. But should be interesting. There should be some fun games, honestly, in that first 8. There's some good games on there. So, either of you have any player props when it comes to the Cowboys that are of interest to you?
Yeah, I've got a few actually on Dallas here. And I'll be honest, this one I actually poached from someone else. And I say that because initially I never would have thought of it, but someone made a case for this. And the more I thought about it, I'm like, this is really good. So Mike McCarthy for Coach of the Year. He's at 40-1 right now on most books. And if you think about it, what you're looking for here is Dallas basically to win that NFC East, which is not impossible. We just said, hey, it's, they're pushing Philly there. And if he does that and this offense is explosive, you got to think that, hey, Dallas, big market team, if they're in the mix for that 1 seed type thing in the NFC, he's got to be up there. So I think that's a nice return. But really the 2 that I have, and I know I sound like a broken record, but these are kind of injury-proof props here. Tony Pollard over 1,000 yards rushing. If he's healthy, and that's the big question, right? We said if he's going to be the number 1 guy, is he going to be able to be durable? Who else is going to be in the mix? He's going to cruise past 1,000 yards if he's healthy. So I think that's a play you can look at. And then even you guys mentioned Dak. So when you look back, both his yardage and his TD prop, he's hit 2 out of the last 4 years. And when he's hit them comfortably. So his yardage right now is 4,000. In the 2 times he hit it, he threw for 4,300 plus, and his TDs are 26.5. He threw over 30 in those 2 seasons. The only reason he didn't get that the other 2 seasons is because he missed substantial time. So again, you're banking on Dak Prescott to stay healthy, which he has struggled to do, but he plays the quarterback position, and not saying that makes him immune, but he's not a running back. He's not, potentially getting hit over and over and over again. So you look at that, the numbers are factoring in that potential injury. But if you think he can stay healthy, he should absolutely fly by those numbers, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it should be a passing attack this year too. Even dumping the ball off to Pollard some, not only running it, still counts for yards, right? D, anything sticking out to you on the prop side?
I don't have any props at this time, but the only one that I had jotted down to think of is Dak to go over 26.5. And I think that would be good as well. So over 26.5 touchdowns, I think is a good bet as well. And I hope that they're not too good because, that would be like, 12-5 is getting probably a little bit close. And then you're kind of flirting with the Eagles there. But I like what they're – yeah, I like almost to what they have. And, like, they have a top 5 roster. And just, like, it's a matter of time until they put it together. And eventually they're going to get to the conference championship game. It's just a matter of time. And is this the year? Who knows, man? So, yeah.
D, I do not want us to get you down here tonight because you weren't able to join us, but on the NFC North video, Yanni really cheered me up talking about the Vikings, and I don't want us to do the opposite for you here with the Eagles. So,
still pretty confident in the Eagles.
We'll say lots of nice things. Totally.
Yeah, I'm still confident, but it's a matter of time until they put it together, and they have a pretty damn good OC now too. So I think that changing to Schottenheimer is a good thing, and we'll see. I like the coach of the year also. If you can get 40-1, that would be a good price.
Yanni's brought some wide lines these last couple weeks.
Yeah, that is a valuable bet because that could become 20-1 after 2 weeks. So hit that just to have in your back pocket. So nice ticket right there.
All right, well, that's the Cowboys. Let's move on to team number 2, which is the New York Giants, the New York Football Giants, because otherwise it would be confusing what sport they play. Over under 7.5, plus 100 to the over, minus 112 to the under, plus 850 to win the division. So fairly wide. They start out with Dallas, and then they go to Arizona and San Francisco. San Francisco's on a Thursday night, then Seattle at home on a Monday night, at Miami, at Buffalo, Washington at home, and the Jets at home. Yanni, we're going to kick this one to you first to tell us what you think of the Giants.
Well, I'll say this. We've repeated this a few times as well. The Giants are a team that is getting better. They obviously got a lot better last year, and I think they're continuing to get better. But the question is, did they do enough? And I mentioned it earlier that I think they did narrow the gap a little bit, but narrowing the gap isn't necessarily good enough to overtake Dallas and Philadelphia there. I think that they can compete with them, but I think when you look at what we're going to see from the Giants this season, I feel like it's going to be similar to what we saw last year. The difference is it's a little bit expected this year, whereas last year it was not. I love Dable as their coach, and not due to any bias. I just think he's a guy that gets it. His players seem to really like him. He's got a creative mind as far as what he does. So I think, again, they're heading in the right direction. The problem that I have with this team, and I should say they had a nice offseason as well. They really didn't lose anybody. I think Julian Love is probably the big piece that left there on the defense, which, not the end of the world. I think they can replace that. So, I think that they're poised to have a good season. But when you start looking there, the two things that just jump out to me are quarterback, obviously, and the lack of star wideouts. They have basically a stable of either unproven or mediocre wide receivers. And I think in today's NFL, you want to see a good quarterback and some good weapons. And I just don't know that they have that. So when I look at that, I do worry a little bit that offense is going to be able to keep up when they need to. And I think their defense is solid, but I don't think it's great. So, you kind of look at that and you say, okay, they've got, let's call it a average defense. And really, in my opinion, an average to slightly above average offense at this point. And we can argue all day whether we think that averageness is because of Daniel Jones or not. The bottom line is he's their guy. He's paid. He played well with what they asked him to do. But when you put those pieces to the puzzle together, for me, I just don't think it's enough. So, I've got this team basically right around their win total. I've got them at 7-10. I've got them at 3-5 after their first 8 there. I think they've got it's just asking a little too much. And I don't know, this team to me seems like one of those teams that's stuck in limbo, right? They're not good enough to win a Super Bowl, but they're not bad enough to have to rebuild and retool. They're kind of stuck in the middle land there, which is not necessarily ideal. But we'll see. Maybe they'll take that step forward. I don't see it, though. I've got them at about a 7-10 team.
All right. D, tell us why the Giants are going to win the Super Bowl.
I'm not going to tell you as to why they're going to win the Super Bowl, because I saw them get the shit kicked out of them in person, round 2 of the playoffs. Look, they're a good team, like slightly above average team, but not a great team, to Yanni's points. I think that they don't wow you with anything. They had to sign Jones because you can't just let him go, because then you have to draft another quarterback and then you have to sign a free agent. It's like, okay, you let Jones go and you sign a guy like Carr. So they had to sign him, I guess. I like what they do overall. I like the coaching staff. I think that I looked at their win total as 7.5 and said, okay, give me a reason to take the over. Took a look at their schedule and said, I see maybe 8-9 wins at the most. It's hard to get to 10. Pretty tough in the NFC East. If you go 2-2 against the Eagles and the Cowboys, you're in line to get to 10 wins, but it's just so hard to make that happen. They start the season against the Cowboys, tough game at home though. So if they could get off on the right foot, they have that. And then they play the Cards in week 2, and you could get to 2-0, then all of a sudden you're feeling good about yourself. I mean, it's just hard for me to take any kind of over on them. But that being said, I'm not going to bet the under, because I have to say that they're like an 8-win team, but I'm not super confident in that. I like the coaching staff, kind of wish that they had more stud players on that team. And to Yanni's point, they might be stuck in limbo a little bit here. So we'll see what happens.
I think I'm fairly similar to you guys, but maybe even a little more negative. Well, I think more negative. I think this team takes a little bit of a step back from what we saw last year. I think they overperformed last year, to be honest. And I like Brian Daboll a lot, and I think he's a big reason why they did. But some of the points that you guys made, I mean, these wide receivers that they added, Isaiah Hodgins, they still have Darius Slayton, Paris Campbell, they drafted Jalen Hyatt, still have Sterling Shepard. Again, and they did add Darren Waller, so that's a good add at tight end. I'll give them that. But it's just sort of like, great, you added a whole lot of okay. I mean, I don't really know what that gets you in the NFL today. The defense was one of the worst in the league against the run. The only thing they did to try to shore that up was adding Okereke from the Colts at linebacker, and he has done pretty well against the run, so maybe that helps some. But they drafted help at cornerback, so they've got young guys playing cornerback. So I don't know that they can just put them on island. So I think the defense is so-so. Offensive line, PFF has them ranked number 29. Again, we'll see where Yanni has them ranked when he does his. But and when I just look at this, I think we're going to get to the Eagles, but the Eagles and the Cowboys have great offensive lines, great defensive lines. The Giants do not. Their defensive line is all right, but their offensive line isn't great. Their skill position guys aren't great. I would say outside of Waller, and Barkley's a good running back for sure. The other thing for me is, can Daniel Jones keep up what he's been doing? Jones was 6th overall in QBR last year. He was one of the best in the league at not turning the ball over. And I think he is improving, and I'm not actually anti-Daniel Jones. I would put Daniel Jones in a similar category to like a Kirk Cousins, where it's a guy you probably keep because you're only going to do worse if you get rid of him. And D, you said that, right? Like they had to pay him. They had to keep him because what else are they going to do? But that doesn't mean that he's great. And so if anything, I would expect him to negatively regress a little bit in some of those areas from where he's been. So this is a team, when I look at the division, that I think the gap between them and the top 2 teams is fairly decent. I'm not running to bet the under. I think 7.5 is a nicely set line. I just think those other 2 teams get to 10. So if they are hovering around 7 or 8, that's a couple game gap. And I actually think that this team, I mean, you guys said 3. I think, did you both say 3 and 5 for first 8?
I have them as 4 and 4.
4 and 4. So I think they could be 2 and 6. 4 and 4. And maybe they're 3 and 5, and maybe whatever. This is stupid, right? Like, of course they could be 4 and 4, they could be 8, no, whatever. But I really do think that they could be 2-6 after the first 8. I think they are susceptible even to teams like Washington, who we'll get to when they play those teams, because I just don't think they have enough skill. I do love their coaching. That's the thing for me. Absolutely love Brian Daboll, and he maybe gets them ready, and maybe they overperform again. But I think this at some point I have to pick some teams to take a step backward, and this is one that I'm going to pick to take a step backward. Either of you see a path for them to win the division, like something that would have to happen for them to be able to win the division?
Probably not, because I mean, to have that happen, you probably need like a Hurts injury and a Dak injury. Like, I mean, they're like, you would have to go 2-0 against either the Eagles or the Cowboys and probably take like a road game that I don't foresee them taking, like at Bills, which I don't see happening at all. I think it's going to be really tough, and that's why I'm not going to bet on them to win the division. And I'm a little bit biased, I know, but I just, to your point, I think they overachieved a bit last year. Schedule was pretty easy. Schedule's harder this year. I don't see it happen unless there's injuries.
Yeah, I would echo that. I don't really see a path there minus substantial injuries to Philly and Dallas. I think that's really the only way they can leapfrog them. I just don't think they have enough at the quarterback position, and I don't think they have enough talent overall.
Yeah. So I'll give one bet that I'm interested in, and then one that I haven't made yet, but unless one of you talks me out of it, I'm making it. So the first one, and I actually haven't gone to look at the line, but I'd be a little interested in the Giants to miss the playoffs because I think that they play in such a tough division that it's not that I think they're worse than the second, third place teams in some of the other NFC divisions, but the North that we covered, the North is easier than this division is. And so I think that there is a good chance for them to win 7 games and end up missing the playoffs. That's not the bet that I'm running to make, though. The one that I'm making, unless you talk me out of it, is Kayvon Thibodeau over 4.75 sacks at minus 125. He had 4 last year, and he didn't really come on until the end of the year. So we already talked about on a previous video, the long shot, I think it was plus 5,500, was it on him to win Defensive Player of the Year? I already made a small bet on that. And so I kind of like him to smash this line, like at least to get to 8 or 9 sacks.
Yeah, let me just add, because the notes I have here for the Giants, I have 3 Kayvon Thibodeau notes here. I have Defensive Player of the Year at 55-1, which you mentioned there. I have the over on DraftKings. It's actually minus 110, 4.75 sacks.
Sweet.
So, I think to me that is you've got to hammer that. I think that is a must bet. And you can actually bet over 8.75 sacks on DraftKings at plus 185. So, depending upon what you think there, obviously, I think over 4.5 is, I mean, you never say this in the sports betting world, but that's free money, man. I mean, that's just a beautiful bet. And again, I think you could even look at that plus 185 bet if you wanted to. And if you truly, truly believe in the guy, you can have Kayvon Thibodeau to lead the league in sacks at 150-1. Now that's asking
150. Oh my gosh,
that's 150-1 is something that, I mean, just put $2 on it if you really don't want to bet
exactly.
it. Like that's just a habit.
That's what I mean. And, you start looking and saying, okay, yeah, I mean, it's a long shot that he's going to have more than the Bosas and TJ Watts of the world. But, with that kind of payoff, why don't you have $5 on it? So anyways, I think he's where my player props are. And I don't know if we're at that point yet, but I did have one other Giants bet that I'll share that I like as well. So on DraftKings, you can get under division specials, you can get New York Giants to score 1 or more touchdowns in every regular season game for plus 250. And they did it last year. So, I mean, they've proven, obviously, they can do it. All you need is 1 touchdown every week, plus 250. That's a pretty nice payoff for a bet that cashed last year. I think there's a realistic shot that it would happen again.
D, any thoughts on those or anything else with the Giants?
Oh, D might have
frozen. I'll take that as a no.
Yeah.
I thought he was just really contemplating.
He's deep in thought.
He's very deep in thought. D, are you with us? I can't tell. Oh, there he is. I think he's coming back.
I'm back now.
Kinda.
Oh.
It's breaking up a little, but we'll give it a second to buffer, and I'm sure it'll be fine. Let me.
It was spinning, and then I can see you now.
The old wheel of death. Yeah, I think you're coming back now, man.
I think I'm back now. Yep, I think I'm back. I wasn't even clicking around on anything. I'm not sure what happened there. But
Dude,
now
you don't
I
have to tell people you were looking.
See and hear. Just scrolling Pornhub as Yanni was talking. No, it just
your computer can't handle that, man.
It's just absolutely. But now it's back. It glitched out.
That's good.
Solid service. I'm right next to the router too. Sweet.
All right. Well, let's move on from the Giants, and it's an important time for D as we get to his Philadelphia Eagles.
Hopefully the internet can hold up as we get to the Eagles.
That's right. Over under set at 11.5 plus 108 to the over, minus 110 to the under, minus 110 on the division, though most sites don't even have minus 110 anymore. But that is the best that's out there. And they start out at New England. Then they get Minnesota at home on a Thursday, at Tampa Bay on a Monday, Washington at the Rams, at the Jets. The Dolphins come to town, and then they go to the nation's capital to play the Commanders. D, this is your team. What are they going to do this year?
I think they're going to be good again. It's pretty easy schedule to start, right? I mean, you take a look at that schedule and the first 8 games. I mean, if you wanted to make a case for winning every game, you could. I'm sure that they'll drop 1 or 2. I went through last night and tried to make a case for losing 2 games in the first 8. And I said, okay, at Jets in week 6 could be a spot that they could lose. I guess against your Vikes, Tasty, that could be a possibility, but short week in week 2, I don't see that happening. They'll probably be a TD favorite, right? So you take a look at that and say, okay, minimum I think is 6-2 in their first 8. They play the Cowboys in week 9. I think that this team should be right there again. And that's, I mean, that's not like breaking news here. I mean, they're number 2 in odds to take the Super Bowl now, but I think that they have a great roster, an awesome offensive line. Hurts in year, 3 now? And he is year 2 with Brown. And I think that that should continue to evolve pretty well. It's hard to make a case for this team losing the NFC, so I have a ticket on them to take it at minus 110. We talked about how the Cowboys are, in terms of talent, they're probably right there. I would take the Eagles over the Cowboys just because I like Hurts over Dak. But you take a look at it and say, okay, this team, to get home field advantage again, probably needs to start in their first 9. They probably need to start at least 7-2. Because the back half of the schedule gets tough. And if they have any kind of injuries, they go at KC. They play, so 3 games in a row. It's at KC, Yanni's Bills, and then Niners, at Cowboys. So it gets pretty tough fast. So start fast. Take the NFC East. I like them at over 11.5 wins. I see them as about 12-5 or so. If they only win 11, that kind of opened the doors to allowing the Cowboys in. And I think all in all, they take the NFC East. Do they take the 1 seed again? I will let you guys discuss that and tell me if they will have home field advantage again. But pretty high on this team. Still kind of licking my wounds over the Super Bowl, even though it was 5 months ago now. It's hard to lose, but I'm hoping to have them right back in the big game again.
Yanni, what's the word?
Pretty much in agreement with what D said there. When you look at this team last year to this year, they seem about the same to me. But that's a good thing because they were darn close to winning the Super Bowl. So even though they're not necessarily improved from a year ago, it's hard to improve when you're already kind of at the top of the food chain there. They were able to kind of retool a little bit on the defense there. Obviously, they kind of lucked out, I think, in the draft with a couple of their first-round picks there, which helps when you lose a guy like Javon Hargrave. They were able to at least bring some veterans into the secondary there, which should help offset some of the loss that they had there as well. So I think that we're looking at a very similar team from last year. D nailed it in the sense that this team really needs to try to start 7-1 or at worst 6-2. I have them probably, just like you said, he laid it out perfectly. This team could be 8-0. Now, I don't think that's going to happen. I think they probably end up 6-2. But I think if they do that, that does give them a solid inside track to get that number 1 seed. Because when you start looking at that kind of 4-game stretch that he mentioned there, now you only need to split that. If you can kind of start 6-2, you don't have to win all those games. You just got to kind of hold serve at home or pull off an upset here or there, whatever. So I think they're there. I think the division, even at -120, which is more of where that number sits today, I still think it's in play because I still trust this team a lot more than I trust Dallas. You can argue whether that's a good bet or not when we're here saying, there's not a huge gap between the two. But I think that prior performance counts for something. And I think that overall that Eagles roster is just a little bit better. I think their offensive line is better than Dallas. I think their wide receivers are better. I think their running game is deeper. And then I think their defenses are similar. You might give Dallas maybe a slight edge there. So anyways, I think they can win that division. I fully expect this team to be competing for a first round bye. And I would say anything short of a top 3 seed would be a major disappointment for this team.
Yeah, it would have to be. I would think. I agree.
I'd be pissed off. Yeah, if they don't have a top 3 seed, like to me, like I expect them to have home field. Well, like it's hard to expect a team to have the best record, right? But like the teams competing against them are the Niners, and I'm just taking a look at them. Like I don't think the Niners have a quarterback, and if they can stave off Dallas, I'm like this team should have home field advantage. But if they got below a 3 seed, I would not be too happy, guys.
Yeah, that would be rough. It's definitely hard to see that happening. Yanni, I kind of like what you said of they feel similar to last year. And I definitely think exactly the same. They traded out some pieces, but it doesn't feel like they moved up significantly, down significantly. Jalen Hurts has another year of experience under his belt. I think that's not a bad thing. So I think he could be even better, though he was certainly very good last year. So
have to keep him healthy,
like
though,
he did
right?
before. He doesn't even need to be a lot better, I don't think. One question that I do have, and I honestly don't know. I mean, I looked up who Sean Desai is if that's even how you say his name and stuff, but Jonathan Gannon's gone now off of the defense. I don't know enough to speak to it, but do either of you have any sense of if that change in coaching on the defensive side of the ball means anything one way or another?
Personally, I'm not too concerned. I should know more about him, but I think that there's so many pieces there that I think, he was appointed to this role because he doesn't suck, right? So as long as you don't come in and just, stink up the joint, I think it'll be perfectly fine because they have so many cogs there. They have Slay back. They signed Bradbury, which I was shocked about. So like you keep those 2 key cogs, and it's like you have Fletcher Cox back. I know he's aging, but that's a key piece there as well. So you have all of the pieces. I think they should be perfectly fine there. I'm sure that there will be weeks where I'm pulling out my hair and cursing this guy out, but I think that it should be fine. It should be fine.
Yeah, I don't have much to add because I don't know a whole lot about him. I will say this. I was not a big Gannon fan personally. I think that when you look at it, and look, it's easy for any of us sitting at a computer to talk about what a team should or shouldn't do as far as the scheme goes. We're here, they're coaching, that's why. But that being said, I didn't like the way Gannon utilized that secondary in particular in Philly. I think when you have 2, what I would consider pretty darn elite cornerbacks, playing that soft cover 3 that they were playing, I didn't like that, especially when you have a team that can get home with a pass rush. So I had a big problem with that. I actually think, if anything, we could see an upgrade there as far as defensive strategy goes. And again, I can't swear to that. I don't know much about that, but I wouldn't be surprised if this defense ends up even better.
Yeah, from the little bit of research that I've done, being with the Seahawks last year, the Bears before that, it looks like he likes to get his defenses creating pressure. A lot of forced fumbles, sacks, takeaways. So, I mean, this is a team that's so good. It's one of the things I know I talk about it a lot, but if this team is good in the turnover category, that's where you start seeing them get 13 or 14 wins, I think.
Yep.
Because they don't need extra chances. If they get
Agreed.
extra chances, then this team's going to be way up there in terms of wins. Well, I think we all agree that they're the rightful favorite to win the division. So personally, I bet them to win the division when it was still plus money. I think it's a decent bet now still. I do think they certainly should be the favorite. The one bet, I don't know that I'll make it, but the one that I would have any interest in, and I'd like to play futures for the long haul, not just in the short term. So for me, this would be a play to get a different play later. And that would be taking their over on wins right now. I mean, 11.5 is high, and I actually think they probably end up around 11 or 12. I think it's pretty well lined, but it's plus money. And D, you said it, and I absolutely agree that the first half of that schedule is so easy. Well, not so easy, but it's easier. So I definitely
it's pretty
think,
damn easy overall.
yeah. So 7-1, even 8-0 is in the cards. And if they're 7-1 or 8-0 halfway through, then you're going to be able to come back and get under 13.5 or something like that on their win total, and then you get a nice middle. So that's the only way I would play. I wouldn't play it straight up, but if you wanted to play for that middle, I think that's not a bad play. Any other plays or player props on the Eagles?
Player props, I haven't hit anything, but I was taking a look at this. I like AJ Brown over 1,050 receiving yards. I think that's pretty good. He went for almost 1,500 last year. It's year 2. I mean, I don't expect him to put up 1,500 yards, but I would think he's good for 1,100-1,200. So I thought that was light. Devontae Smith at, I had it written down, 950.5. I mean, he's in there also. It's like, okay, he went over that last year, another year with Hurts. As long as Hurts doesn't get hurt, right? That should be good. So those two, I think, are decent plays overall, the over receiving yards on the two stud wide receivers.
Yanni?
Yeah, I would add, I had both of them marked as well. I mean, you get basically a 250-yard cushion with Devontae Smith from what he did a year ago, and like D said, about a 400-yard cushion with A.J. Brown. Again, they're factoring in injuries, but if these guys stay healthy, I mean, they have a big cushion there. And then I think you could even look at Jalen Hurts passing. I mean, if you like both of their receivers, he's at 3,700. He hit that last year by a yard, but he did hit that last year, and he missed 2 games. So, you know, it's kind of one of those things where I expect kind of that evolution of the quote-unquote running quarterback. They tend to throw a little bit more every year, run just a little bit less. Doesn't mean I don't expect Hurts to run quite a bit still, but you know, to me, again, these are, when you look at those passing, I mean, that's just all injury. I mean, as long as they stay healthy, those guys should all hit that. So if you trust that, go for it. And then I've got a couple other really interesting ones here as well. So I mentioned the Giants with 1 TD at plus 250. The Eagles have one or more rush TD in every regular season game at plus 900. Now, I get it. You know, that's asking a lot, and they did not do that in 2 games last year. But at plus 900, you got to figure this team obviously has Jalen Hurts when they get inside the 5 there. They brought in a big back like Rashad Penny. You know, even DeAndre Swift's a big enough guy to get in there. That, to me, seems like a big return payoff for something that very potentially could happen. So I think that's an interesting bet. And then the last one that I have that's also interesting is, if you do believe that they're going to win this division, which I do, you can bet the Eagles over 4.5 division wins at plus 185. So you get a nice return on that. I mean, in essence, what you're saying is we can sweep the Giants, we can sweep Washington and split with Dallas, or some form or combination of that. And I think that's very doable for this team. So with a plus 185 payoff, I think you could take a shot at that.
They're certainly going to, I mean, unless things go crazy, they're going to be favored in 5 games at least, right? Maybe 100%. Not in Dallas, but.
Yep.
So don't hate it. All right. Well, that's it for the Eagles. Let's move on to the class of the division, the Washington Commanders. Over under 6.5, plus 110 to the over, minus 118 to the under. I will say in the last 3 to 4 weeks, this is the one team where there was significant line movement on their over-under because it was flipped the other way a few weeks ago. So it's gotten more expensive to go under on the Commanders. Plus 1,300 to win the division. They start out with a banger of a matchup with the Cardinals coming to town with maybe no quarterback. They're at Denver, Buffalo Bills at home, at Philadelphia. Oof, that's a tough little stretch. Chicago on a Thursday at home. Then they're at Atlanta, at the Giants, and then Philadelphia again. So they get their 2 games with Philadelphia over with early on here. Yanni, we're going to go back to you. And what do you think about Sam Howell leading the charge for the Washington Commanders?
I don't know. None of us know. And that's what makes it a little difficult to handicap this team. We talked about that when we were talking about the North and saying with a guy like Jordan Love, what do we get with Sam Howell? I mean, is this a guy that can come in and be dynamic, or is this a guy that's going to come in and struggle? I think that logic would say it's probably the latter. He's probably going to come in and have some trouble, especially when we talk about the defenses in Philly and Dallas. And, that's asking a lot. And you mentioned that first 8 schedule. I mean, they'll be lucky to win 2 games in that. I mean, they could realistically be 2-6, even 1-7. I don't think they'll be that bad because I think they're a quality team, but that quarterback position scares me here. And I'll say this, there is upside in Washington for a couple reasons. I think there's reason to be optimistic within the organization. They've got some things going on behind the scenes there that I think are reason to be positive in Washington. And they have a nice roster. When you really dig into it, it's not a bad roster at all. It's just a question mark with the quarterback position. So if Howell could come in and be a good player, I mean, not even great, if he could be a good quarterback, this team could surprise some people. But I think it's asking a lot for him in this division to come in right away and be that guy. I mean, we wouldn't be surprised. I know we talked about it. Would anyone be shocked if by week 5, Jacoby Brissett was starting, or even sooner to start the season, or week 4? I mean, we just don't know how Howell's going to look. And that's what I think makes it really tough to handicap this team. But I will say this. I like their skill position players. I love their wide receivers. I think McLaurin, Dotson, and Samuel are as good as it gets as a trio outside of maybe Chase, Higgins, and Boyd. So I love their skill positions. Their defense, I think, they probably underperformed a little bit, but they're going to get some guys healthier, a guy like Chase Young on that defensive line. They drafted Emmanuel Forbes, who I'll get to in a second here with something else. I think this team could be good, but I think we're going to see just how important the quarterback position is in the NFL. And I think that's ultimately what's going to hold this team back this year, unfortunately for them. Because I'm telling you what, if you were to plug an Aaron Rodgers into this team, I think you're looking at just what we look at with the Jets this year, if not maybe even a little bit better. So that's where I'm at on this team. The quarterback is too much of a question for me. As a result, I've got them under that win total mark. And I think, unfortunately, they're the odd man out despite having some really talented players on their team.
D, thoughts on the Commanders?
It is hard to take their over. I think that you don't really know as to what you're getting. Do we think that Sam Howell will be a serviceable quarterback? I think he could be, but again, you really don't know. Could we see Jacoby Brissett in there? Sure. Could we see them start 0-5 and they fire their head coach and no more Ron Rivera, and then we have good old Eric Bieniemy as head coach? Is that why he took the OC job there? Who knows, right? So it's they have an average roster and they have some studs. Like, I love Scary Terry, right? Like he's a great skill player, but like at the end of the day, it's like you have a tough NFC East. I don't see them winning more than 3 games in that whole entire thing. So like, it's like, okay, you go 2-4. Hopefully you can beat the Giants once. Maybe you can beat Philly once. I hope that does not happen, even though it did happen last year. And you take a look at their schedule, and it's not the easiest of schedules for a team that was not too good last year. So you put it all together. I mean, I can't in my right mind take them to go over 6.5. Is it possible? Certainly possible. But it's kind of one of those things that you're not going to really believe it until you see it. So I think that they're a team that's in that 6 to 8 win range. I don't think they're going to contend to win the NFC East at all. Could they give some close games? 100%. And I'm curious to see what happens here with Howe. But if you had to take anything gun to head, I guess I take the under on the 6.5, but I'm steering clear, guys.
I like this team less. I their skill position players to me are, I mean, yes, Terry McLaurin is great. Jahan Dotson, good player and a lot of promise. I'm not a huge Curtis Samuel guy. Logan Thomas, fine. This reminds me, which team was it in the North where the skill position players to me are just sort of, yeah, they're fine. I don't love them. And you pair that to me, the big thing is I think this is a below average offensive line. How far below average, I'm not sure, but you pair that with a quarterback who's getting his first meaningful starts, most likely, assuming Jacoby Brissett's not playing. And I think that that's a recipe for a lot of volatility, but more negative than positive in year one. I don't think this year is going to determine whether Sam Howell has a future in the NFL, unless it's really bad, like Zach Wilson bad or something. But I don't actually anticipate that. I mean, I think that this is a guy who had a good college career and seems to know how to play the game of football well. And I think in the long term that could bode well, but I think that it's going to be a struggle for the offense this year. And then on the defensive side, yes, their defensive line is pretty good, but I think their defensive secondary is okay. I mean, Yanni, you said you were going to get to some youth in the secondary, and the youth in the secondary for me again is like, hey, look, these guys could have promise in the long run, but coming in and having a lot of youth in the secondary in year one, I just think sets you up to have some problems. And then I also have this as the team with the hardest schedule out of any in this division, and at least fighting to be the worst team in this division. And a lot of that comes because they have to play the Cowboys and the Eagles twice, so that's a big part of the schedule being tough. This is a team where I think if they don't come out of these first 8 games with at least 3 wins, they're in for a rough season because their schedule is tough in that second half as well. And I do have them at 3-5. I think there are some winnable games here. I think I'm saying that I don't think they're a terrible team, and in another division, they might not even get last. And who knows, maybe here something crazy happens. They don't get last. Maybe they somehow get to third. But this is a team that I don't feel very positive about for this year, though I think they have some decent pieces where the future isn't necessarily bleak. So I have them at 3-5 after 8, but I bet under 6.5 when it was at plus money. At minus 118 now, I actually think I would leave it alone and just see how the season goes, and maybe end up, if they get 3 wins, if maybe they even get to 4-4. And if they do that, then you're going to get a nicer number to go under on a win total going into the second half of the season. So even that bet at the current line, I would leave alone. Not a team I'm very excited about for this year, at least. Any thoughts on, I mean, Yanni, I think you were a little higher on him. Do you see any path for this team to be in contention for the division, or is that too far out there?
No, and I wouldn't say that I'm high on them. I mean, I have them 2-6 after the first 8, and I have them 5.
Okay. Never mind.
It's going to be hard at 2-6. I have 2-6 first 8.
Apparently, I'm the one who's high on the Commanders. That's my bad.
No. I have them 5-12 overall. So I mean, I have them under their win total as well. But I think it's more, like you said, it's more circumstance than anything. I think it's a tough schedule. It's a new quarterback, like you said, behind a mediocre at best offensive line. And it's just not a recipe in that division to be successful. If you put them in the NFC South or, even if you put them in the NFC North, I think they're competitive. I think you could put them in the South and say they could probably compete with Atlanta. They could probably compete with New Orleans. They can probably keep up with your Vikings and the Lions. I mean, they're not far behind those teams, in my opinion. But when you look at Philly and Dallas, and they are far behind those teams. So I think, and again, you mentioned their schedule is really tough. So I just think at the end of the day, like, they have the cupboard's not bare, in my opinion, in Washington. They just don't, like you said, they don't have enough right now, and the circumstance isn't good enough for them to contend for that division right now.
All right. I apologize for making it sound like you were too high on the Commanders.
You never know. It could happen if they start 5-3 and they rip off 2 against the Eagles. Stranger things have happened, right?
If it sounds like I'm high on that team, it's because, a lot of us, when we like to play couch GM, you look at that Washington roster and there's 6 or 7 guys that you would gladly pluck off that team to put on your team. I mean, you would grab a handful of these guys in a heartbeat and say, I'd take that guy on my team. I'd take that guy to start on my team. And that's why, it probably sounded like I was high on them, but you're right. It's like, having first-round draft picks on the defensive line is great, and that can help, but can that overcome, your new quarterback behind a mediocre offensive line? Having Terry McLaurin's, great, but how much can you utilize them? And I'll just say this, I absolutely love Jahan Dotson, and I would, if it were not for Sam Howell, I would be banging the drum that he is like fantasy steal of the year, that kind of a thing. Because of Howell, though, I think, again, he could potentially hold a guy like Dotson back. And like you said, same thing on the offense there. He could just kind of be, like you said, it's okay, right? And okay is not going to be good enough in that division to win.
Yeah. Any player props that you guys like on the Commanders?
I personally don't have any player props at all. I didn't spend a lot of time taking a close look at their player props. Didn't do a lot of homework. Perhaps Yanni has something. It's hard to take anything because of Sam Howell, though. It's like I love to take some overs on Scary Terry, but if I don't know what Howell's going to give me, I don't know if I want to take it, right? So that's kind of where my head was out there.
I've got two that you can look at here. One's a little bit of a long shot here, but I mentioned Emmanuel Forbes. For whatever it's worth, I'm really, really high on this guy, and he's defensive rookie of the year at plus 2,000. And when you look at a defensive player of the year, or in this case, defensive rookie of the year, probably one of two things has to happen. Either they have a bunch of sacks or a bunch of interceptions. Forbes is ideally going to start week one, and he's probably going to get targeted early on. He's got the potential to really, I think he's going to be a potential Pro Bowl type player out there. So I think you could look at that as a long shot, not necessarily betting it, but it's something you could consider. But the bet that I have here that I like is, and it's actually not a player that I love, but it's Brian Robinson Jr.'s over. He's at 800 rushing yards, 800.5 rushing yards at even money to take the over. He got to that last year as a rookie, and he did that having missed the first 3 games of the season, if you guys remember. And then even the first couple weeks, he was kind of 50-50-ish with Antonio Gibson. As the season went on, that's a guy that got stronger the last 5, 6, 7 games of the season. So I think is kind of the full-time starter there. To me, we talked about Howell. They're probably going to try to lean on the running game a little bit. Now, obviously, we know game script can come in if they fall behind in games and they have to start throwing. And of course, Antonio Gibson is still on the roster there. But I mean, knowing that he basically got to 800 yards last year, it sure seems like he should be able to get over that again this year.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. The one that I'm interested in is one I actually can't find a line for right now, though I haven't checked all my books, but I don't see it on DraftKings, and that's an under on Sam Howell's pass yards. And it's for a couple reasons. Well, one of the reasons you said, at least, is I think that this is a team that's going to try to lean on the run. And I kind of wonder if for them to just drop back and throw the ball a lot behind that offensive line, they'd have to be down by a ton. Like, I think as long as they're even in shouting distance, they're going to keep trying to run the ball, control the clock, don't give the ball back to the other team's offense right away, that kind of thing. Especially with a better defense, too. It's easier to take a more conservative offensive script when you're like, hey, our defense can keep us in the game. Let's just not screw this up.
Yeah, and think about it. Not to cut you off. I apologize.
Yeah, no, you're good. You're good.
I was just going to say, you've got Ron Rivera, who is that kind of old school, let's run the ball, play defense type coach. And Eric Bieniemy, what was the word in Kansas City was sometimes when he and Reed didn't get along, it was because he wanted to run the ball more. So, I think, like you said, I think it lines up that they're going to want to try to run the ball if at all possible.
Yeah. And the other thing for me is I don't see Jacoby Brissett probably playing outside of an injury, just because maybe at the beginning of the season they want to try to hang in there, but if they've lost enough games, they're going to want to get Sam Howell a lot of reps. So, but I mean, there is the chance that there's some circumstance where Jacoby Brissett gets in there for a little while too. I mean, I don't know how secure Ron Rivera's job is if they have a terrible season this year. So if he feels like he's got to turn to Brissett to have more of a chance to stay in things, Sam Howell may not play 17 games here either. So just something to keep an eye out for. I don't know what the line will be, and I don't see it, but when it comes out, I'd be interested on the under for him this year. So, all right. Any other thoughts or bets on the NFC East as we wrap it up?
Just the Eagles to have home field advantage. I don't even know what the line is, but take the Eagles to have home field advantage.
It's a good bet in your heart.
It's probably not as attractive as last year. We got it at what, like 11-1 or 12-1 like last year. It's probably at what, 3-1.
No, I think it was more like 18-1 when we bet that.
Yeah, but it was a pretty damn good line. You're not going to get 18-1 this year.
You're not getting that this year.
Tops maybe 3. So
I would just say this. I mean, I collectively, I think the Eagles made for a profitable NFL season last year for us. I mean, multiple layers, right? Whether it was futures, whether it was first half covers, whatever areas we were betting them. And I don't see a whole lot of reason as to why that won't change, this go around. I mean, we'll have to obviously kind of see what the spreads are, but when you try to look at the futures market, I don't see a whole lot of reason why the Eagles still can't be a cash cow again this year.
Just have to stay healthy.
Let's hope so. I got a decent number of bets on the Eagles already. So, All right. Well, before we get out of here, D, I know you got a baseball pod out. Anything going on in the next few months here, or are you just stay holding back, waiting for the NFL season to come?
I'm going to do some MLB. Like, I'm not an expert in baseball, but as I see fit, I'll do a couple recordings here and there, and then we have NFL coming up, pretty fast and furious. So less than 2 months away, and we'll have the weekly podcast up and running.
Not too bad. And Yanni, we inching ever closer to those divisional previews?
Getting close, putting the final touches on them, and hope to have them ready here pretty quickly.
Sweet. Looking forward to seeing those. So as always, follow Yanni at Yanni_bet and at the Bet Crushers on Twitter, and D is at Sir Wager Rager and Wager_Rager. We've been doing this long enough that I have all of that memorized. It's pretty impressive, right?
Pretty good memory.
All those Twitter handles. Check the description for all of that too if you didn't memorize them when I just said it. So, all right, fellas, that wraps up the NFC. We will look forward to next week moving over to the other conference and talking some AFC. So looking forward to it. Thanks for jumping on.